Thank you, everyone, for your time today, for giving me this opportunity to share a little bit about how our customers are adapting to a very rapidly changing world by adopting hybrid cloud technology that really helps them get to achieving their business goals of transformation. A little bit about myself. My name is Justin Hurst. I'm based in Tokyo. I work with Nutanix. I've been here about 10 years now, so it's been quite a while. Originally from the US, but living in the APAC region for about 2 years, focusing on our largest customers and partners and really helping people discover the way forward to update and transform their business. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the challenges people are facing and what they're doing with technology to help overcome that. So we're all, whatever industry we're in, figuring out how to adapt to an economy that's moving to digital. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, whether you're in transportation, logistics, manufacturing, banking, insurance, doesn't matter. Everything is becoming digital. And the last 2 years in particular have shown us that traditional IT planning and lifecycle can't keep up with the demands of our partners and customers and end users. We've got a workforce and we've got a customer base that's used to an app-driven, high-speed, on-demand world. And traditional IT, very, very slow, very process-driven, is hard to react. And so we've seen the rise of cloud computing. And what we found is that it doesn't have to be either or. There's a way to move forward where you can take advantage of the benefits of public cloud while still maintaining control, stability, privacy, and performance of on-prem. So let's dig into how. Now, when we talk to CIOs, CTOs around the region, we see these trends emerging that a lot of them are looking towards some type of cloud model to accelerate growth. And they see that the vast majority see the cloud, whether it's a public cloud or hybrid, as being essential to meeting their corporate growth goals. So this isn't about meeting IT goals necessarily. It's actually showing up at the business level. How can the business respond more quickly? How can we launch that new mobile application? How can we transform our paper-based processes to digital? How can we better engage with our end users or increase efficiency, increase yield, increase safety? All of these are being driven by an agile cloud-like model as companies transform. But what's interesting is if you look at a lot of the media, you would think that there's a mass migration out of the on-prem data center and into the pure public cloud world. But the reality is a little different. Now, this is from a very recent State of the Cloud report based on preferred deployment types. And what I found so interesting is that over 80%, this is worldwide, said they preferred a hybrid approach, some public and some private cloud. That could be at a hyperscaler like an AWS or an Azure. That could be at a service provider, whether it's regional or global, or it could be in a traditional on-prem data center. Only 7% are looking at pure public cloud. And those are mostly small startup type companies that don't have any legacy infrastructure. Another 10% are looking at public cloud only, but using multiple public clouds to balance that so they don't get locked in. And we'll come back to this topic of lock-in because it's very important. But you can see here the vast majority realize that hybrid has to be the way forward. Now, what's interesting is that we're seeing that people still expect over half of workloads to remain on premises. And that mid-size and larger companies are generally the ones approaching this hybrid cloud world because they've got things they can't run in the public cloud, or they've got workloads that are better suited to the public cloud and not on-prem. It's always about finding a balance. And we're also seeing this growing awareness, as I mentioned, that we want to avoid lock-in. Many IT leaders have lived through the times where they were locked into a single vendor solution, whether it was a hardware vendor or a software vendor, a networking vendor, trying to say, you have to use our whole stack or nothing else, and making it quite difficult. What when people are realizing now is that lock-in limits flexibility and leads to higher costs and less agility. And so as they adopt the public cloud, they're being much more cautious about which services do we use and which degree of lock-in do we want to trade for flexibility and cost. Now, what's interesting too is that even among those companies that are adopting pure public cloud or heavily public cloud, is that we're seeing some trends emerge around risks and cautions. The first one is around spending. It's so easy to deploy resources in a public cloud, and that's one of the main attractions. I can swipe a credit card and have a virtual machine, or a database, or a load balancer, or a firewall in seconds. But that leads to sprawl, it leads to waste, and it leads to security gaps as well. So what we're finding is that as companies embrace this hybrid world, they have to have some type of governance and visibility solution in place. And ideally, it's a solution that can look at on-prem and the public cloud and give a holistic view of where resources are being consumed. The second dimension here is the human dimension. Skills that were very valuable on-prem don't necessarily translate well to the public cloud. For example, if you've got someone that's been a lifelong infrastructure administrator doing SANs and fiber channel and NAS, those skills don't translate to the public cloud. There's nothing similar. It's a very different model. And so the core IT skills that we've been building on for decades now need to shift rapidly. And so it's causing a hiring war, and we're having a very hard time throughout the whole region seeing our customers find the talent they need that understands cloud native. And so the ask to us is, can you take a technological solution that takes some of these skills we're used to on-prem and maps them to the public cloud? So it doesn't have to be a whole new world. It can be something that's more comfortable. It's an on-ramp while we adjust, while we reskill. And then, as I mentioned, of course, that third piece to be aware of is the choice, the freedom of choice. And the trade-off here is that when you choose a public cloud vendor, they've all got infrastructure as a service, virtual machines, networks, storage, block storage, file storage, et cetera. And those are pretty low friction. It's easy to move from one to another. But when you start using the higher value services, the database as a service, desktop as a service, anything API driven, you're starting to choose degrees of lock-in. And it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. There's a lot of value in those services. But as an organization, you have to make a conscious choice of the lack of portability you're accepting when you lock into these higher level services. And we've seen this in multiple industries where the cloud providers may move into an adjacent industry. They may move into retail or finance or something competitive. And so you have to be very careful with putting all your eggs in one basket. So, certainly something to be aware of. In fact, this morning, my time, afternoon in the US, there was a large cloud outage in the United States. And this just shows that even though the cloud seems infinite and seems to have perfect uptime, the reality is much different. And when you're trading control, you have to realize what you're giving up as an organization to get that. So when it comes down to is that choosing how to embrace public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, it's a balancing act. It can't be either or. And we've seen this lesson really starting in the US, and now it's spreading worldwide. I can't tell you the number of meetings I had in the US years before people said, we don't want to hear about on-prem or hybrid. We have a cloud-first strategy or a cloud-only strategy. And they went right ahead with that, only to realize months or maybe a year or so later that it's much more complex and that the cost is much higher than they anticipated. And now they're looking to find a way to repatriate some of those applications and to find a balance that mixes. So I always suggest people take a look at some of the early pioneers of using public cloud and learn the lessons from what they tried to do to find the right balance for yourself. And that could come down, again, to performance, security, compliance, and as well as cost, of course. So finding that right balance on an application by application basis or on a business unit by business unit basis is much better than going all in with any one strategy. And again, the key point to remember is choice, is how do we keep our employees, our developers, our customers, our partners flexible and agile to be able to adapt. A great example, I've got a customer here in Japan that's always been staunchly anti-cloud. They want everything on-prem, everything managed, no work from home, nothing remote. They're very traditional in this regard. And they came up to a challenging point with the pandemic that they had to have their workers work remotely. They couldn't have everyone come in, but they had never thought about the infrastructure to enable this. So now they wanted almost overnight to enable remote work and think about what that meant. Access to sensitive data, how do we control resources and cost? How can we ensure regulatory compliance? And so they worked with us on a hybrid solution that was able to give access to those employees. And that's not something they ever thought they'd need. So having that optionality kept them able to stay in business and stay productive. And what's interesting now is that this company is able to actually let people back in the office. They're working again, but they found that the new process is actually more efficient even when they came back to the office. So they're now using these same cloud-enabled tools, but using them in the office or on the go because they built this sort of intelligent process. And that could be remote work, that could be working with business partners, launching new applications, analyzing data. Keeping a choice and flexibility mindset is key in choosing how you design these systems. Because what we're trying to do here, we're trying to get to this perfect spot of look at what the public cloud is great for. Of course, cloud native, microservice-based applications, elasticity, being able to burst on demand, and then being able to pay only for what you use. And being able to do all of that in a programmable way. So this idea of infrastructure as code, rather than building and buying the foundational infrastructure, the thinking is that we can just outsource that to the cloud. But like outsourcing, it's the devil is in the details. Now, the private cloud has many benefits as well. Of course, for traditional applications, they may not be cloud enabled. They might require specific hardware, specific environment, specific control that would be impossible or very difficult to replicate in the public cloud. Or maybe even their licensing model isn't particularly cloud friendly. Also, with the private cloud, we understand the cost dimension. Once infrastructure is purchased, it's a steady state cost to operate that. There's no surprise bill at the end of the month that you consume too much storage or that a runaway VM ate up a lot of compute. So there's a predictability to the cost and an ability to capitalize a cost as well. Also, on-prem, it's easier to design for high performance, particularly, again, vertical applications. The cloud benefits tremendously from scale, and of course, you can get very high performance, but you pay for it. With steady state high performance applications, things like core banking, manufacturing databases, et cetera, you really want that predictable, steady state cost and performance that you can really only get on-prem. And then, of course, there's the cost and resilience dimension. Depending on the industry you're in, whether you're regulated or you might be a government agency or in finance or healthcare, You may have laws that require you to keep your data in a specific place. You may not be able to leave the national borders, right? And you may be required to prove that to someone. And doing that in your own data center, again, is a lot easier to do. The idea is, can we get the best of both those worlds? Can we keep all the control, the security, et cetera, but still bring that agility, that flexibility, that pay-as-you-go model into the private data center, and then extend the private data center into the cloud? And this is really where Nutanix as a company sees ourselves, as being that bridge. And we do this in two ways. The first is bringing a lot of the values of a public cloud inside the data center. So things like fractional consumption, only paying for what you use, and programmable infrastructure, being able to have developers directly control infrastructure and not need to go through IT or ticketing systems to get what they need to be productive. Things like IT as a service, desktops, databases, network, et cetera, as a service, again, rather than something that's built up bespoke and custom for each project. But then doing all this inside the four walls of a data center where you've got predictable cost, predictable security, et cetera. That's the first phase. The second phase is extending that traditional data center into the public cloud. So for example, I've got a customer in Australia. They run a very sensitive Oracle database on-prem, and it has to be on-prem because of the latency to their physical devices in the field. They can't move it into the cloud. But they want to use data analysis tools that are really only available in the public cloud to analyze that data long-term to optimize their processes. And so they turned to us and said, can you make it easy for us to take this on-prem legacy database, copy it into the cloud on a continual basis, and then connect it to those cloud-native services, learn the data analysis benefits, and then bring those back on-prem. It's that really true hybrid work use case, and that's the kind of thing we help enable. So don't just take my word for it. The analysts say the same thing. Right? When you look at the right workload on the right cloud, is that a hybrid model has the lowest total cost of ownership. Where things belong is important. Some applications are better suited to one environment over another. Whether it's virtual desktops or databases, ERP, et cetera, they've all got a place that they best fit based on your requirements. And that's really important to analyze and to look at before you jump in to just an all cloud or an all on-prem model. So as you're designing a hybrid cloud or a multi-cloud environment, it's important to think about a few key things. The first is, how can I get a unified platform? What kind of tooling can I put into place? What kind of resources can I put into place to mean that the skills I have on-prem also work in the public cloud? And how can I make it easy to move my applications back and forth? I may have an application that's on-prem today, and I want to have that application move to the cloud, maybe permanently, maybe on demand. Give you a great example here. I have a customer in the United States, and a very large retail customer. And in the United States, the day after American Thanksgiving is the biggest, busiest shopping day of the year, called Black Friday. And every retailer spends months getting their infrastructure ready for Black Friday, because even a minute of downtime costs millions and millions of dollars more than it would during any other day of the year. And so this particular retailer said, why are we investing so much in infrastructure for really the bursting capability of one day a year? Why don't we work on a hybrid cloud strategy that allows us to burst into the cloud as much as we need on that day, and then when it's done, turn those resources off? So they worked with us to design a hybrid strategy. They burst their workloads into the cloud. It was completely seamless to their employees and their customers, and they did record-breaking numbers with no downtime. So that's just a perfect use case for where the public cloud can be useful, but without redesigning your applications, without complex migration. that could only work because they had a unified data platform that stretched between their on-prem apps and the public cloud. And beyond the data plane, you need to think about a control plane that lets you see and understand cost, security, performance across public and private. Networking as well needs to stretch between public and private. So again, that workload mobility becomes easier. And then lastly, license portability. So being able to take an on-prem product, whether it's an infrastructure solution or an application, and move that to the cloud while keeping the same licensing model is also key. Because if you're buying on-prem infrastructure that's purchased like an appliance, well, that's not going to move into the public cloud if you try to expand it. You're going to have to think about different licensing models, different consumption. So look for a way to unify those models and make them work so you don't have to think about that. You can just go ahead with what makes sense for the business. Right. So again, a little more technical, the challenges we get are not just around the thinking. It's really about how do we consider the whole environment, the whole picture? What skill sets are we going to need to adopt a hybrid cloud and to bring that technology in? Whether that's troubleshooting, operations, visibility, costing, et cetera. Also, what about all of the third party in our ecosystem? What about backup and monitoring, security agents, antivirus, all these things kind of around the application? How do we deal with those in the cloud world? Can we use the same tools we have? Do we have to start from scratch? Can we somehow find a balancing point? And then how does networking work? There's a lot of detail in how do we make two very, very different worlds behave like one. Also, it's important to think about how the cloud behaves from an infrastructure perspective. So the public cloud, to vastly oversimplify, is designed with the assumption that the application is resilient. So that the application does not rely on any particular virtual machine or container or network, but the application itself is healing. Now, most applications traditionally have the opposite assumption. They assume the infrastructure layer is resilient. So if you look inside a traditional on-prem data center, there's lots of layers of infrastructure resilience: storage replication, network redundancy, power redundancy, et cetera. Those don't necessarily exist in the public cloud. And we've seen this mismatch a lot, where someone takes an on-prem application, lifts it, shifts it into the public cloud, and then a cloud region has an outage, has downtime, has maintenance, and the application goes down because there's a mismatch in expectations. So it's really important to understand that before you start undertaking migrations. And then, of course, there's the day two management as well. How do we deal with over and under provisioning? How do we track all of our costs when each service and microservice is billed separately? How do we assign cost to our end users, to our different business units as well? And then how do we keep visibility across on-prem and public cloud when they use vastly different tool sets? So the Nutanix answer to this is to take a platform that was designed originally to bring public cloud type functionality on-prem and extend it back into the cloud. So Nutanix was actually started by one of the chief architects of Google's original cloud infrastructure years ago, who had the concept saying, why don't we bring that type of thinking, that scale out, massively distributed system, and bring those same benefits on-prem, but then give them the things that people expect on-prem, like highly resilient storage, like redundancy and replication for legacy applications that don't support native cloud. And so this became known as hyper-converged infrastructure. Now we've expanded that into hybrid cloud infrastructure. So many of our customers worldwide run Nutanix in their data centers, but increasingly they're extending that now into the public cloud to say, we want to use these same services, but we also want to consume AWS or GCP or Azure. and be able to take those same services side by side and have them interact. Now, on top of that core infrastructure, we've also developed IT as a service. So just like you could go to an AWS or an Azure and consume storage as a service, or a desktop as a service, or database as a service, you can do that through Nutanix, but you can do it in a way that's multi-cloud. So rather than getting locked into one particular cloud vendor, you can say, I want a database as a service, maybe running Oracle or Postgres or Microsoft SQL, but I want the optionality to run that in my own data center, to run that in the cloud, or both. And I want to make it easy to replicate back and forth so that my infrastructure doesn't dictate what my business can do. Rather, it's the other way around. And then lastly, the desktop as a service. Again, giving you that flexibility to say, I need my end users to have access to their systems wherever they are, whether they're in the public cloud or the private cloud. And I want that flexibility to be able to move my virtual desktops and my applications as close to my end users as possible, whether that means running inside AWS, running inside my own data center, et cetera. And so really abstracting away the underlying infrastructure to thinking about everything is just a resource. AWS, Azure, GCP, on-prem, third-party service provider. Those are all just places to run workloads. You should be thinking more about availability, performance, security, cost efficiency, and let the infrastructure decision be handled automatically. And that's really where we're trying to go with this. The other key learning we took away from Google was the idea that you should build one platform for every workload. And this is a very controversial idea originally, because inside most data centers today, there's separate stacks. There's infrastructure for email, infrastructure for database, maybe infrastructure for test dev. And there might be different storage vendors, different compute vendors, even different networking vendors. And it's IT's job to keep those all talking and secured and patched and updated and integrated. The idea that we took forward was, why don't we build one infrastructure, software defined, that can run on any kind of x86 hardware, and allow the software-based infrastructure to run any workload and to run them on the same platform. So being able to run your Oracle and your SAP right next to your Kubernetes, right next to your your traditional applications, right next to your Splunk, right next to your Citrix, on the same infrastructure. And that drives efficiency, that drives scale, and it makes it much easier from a security perspective because you've only got one platform to manage. That means upgrades can be handled much easier. And again, going back to that freedom of choice, if you're on server vendor A and you want to swap it out for server vendor B, it doesn't matter if the software layer is abstracting all of it. You can change to whatever you'd like. And with that same flexibility, we can also extend this into the public cloud. So giving our customers that flexibility to say, I want to run my traditional workloads, but I also want to run storage as a service and database as a service and my new microservice applications, and I want to have the optionality to move them anywhere. Again, as I mentioned, it's not just about traditional apps, it's also about modern applications. As we're moving away from monolithic legacy apps into this idea of microservice, containerized, API-driven applications, we fully support those and all the major platforms that run them as well. Integration with leading platforms like OpenShift or Rancher, of course, with vanilla Kubernetes as well, and with things like Azure Arc or Google Anthos. So giving you freedom of choice for the runtime as well, and integrating that with all the services I mentioned, the database on demand, the security, the replication, et cetera, with those new application platforms. So now you don't have to have a shadow IT for your modern applications. Your core IT team can have visibility on your traditional apps and your modern apps inside the same infrastructure. So how do we do that? I don't want to make this a technical presentation, but the kind of key point to take away from this is Nutanix built this stack, again, to bring cloud-like flexibility and IT as a service on-prem. And now we've taken that same infrastructure and can run it on bare metal inside of a public cloud producer, whether that's AWS, whether that's Azure. Just today, we also announced with Equinix as well. And that ties in to their native services. So you can have your traditional applications, manage and replicate them using Nutanix tools directly into a public cloud without rewriting your app, without worrying about resilience or security that would come from having to refactor it. And you can do that completely seamlessly. In fact, you can even move back and forth between different public clouds. And it all is managed through one console, one tool set, one set of APIs. It also means that the security policy follows the application. So if you define things like microsegmentation to help keep your application secure, that will follow them between on-prem and cloud. So you're keeping up your compliance side of things as well.
Nowadays, install floorings. Pag sinabing floorings, ano siya? Baka wrong spelling na double.
Sorry, I think we got some background noise. Thank you. So, of course, Nutanix has been around for about 12 years now. We've got customers around the world that have chosen us to power their private cloud and their hybrid cloud infrastructures in every industry around the world. But I want to focus on a few, specifically on the topic of hybrid cloud and how they've transformed their business, to go back to the original topic of digital transformation through hybrid cloud. I'll start with a major global bank here, Société Générale. They've developed a hybrid cloud solution. Now, they originally started using Nutanix as a private cloud. And we're very successful with this, running multiple applications, empowering their developers with self-service globally. But they've decided to work together on a hybrid cloud now that extends that same functionality into the public cloud. So they've got that agility and scalability, but it also lets them meet their regulatory requirements they face in the different markets around the world they're in. So someone has been a long-time customer and has really grown into the product and used it to expand how they can achieve their business outcomes. Another great example here is with Airbus in their defense arm. They said by moving to this software-defined infrastructure, they're able to move much faster. They can deploy in days instead of weeks or months. They've got integration that used to take weeks or months of all the different components, again, down to days. And they can scale quickly. So as their demand shift, as they onboard new projects and new customers, they're able to very quickly grow or shrink their infrastructure footprint to meet that by adopting a hybrid cloud model. And of course, in their industry, security is paramount. You've seen the same with Mercedes-Benz, right? Not only did the infrastructure get more efficient, but they were able to reduce downtime by improving upgrade speed. Again, the benefit of having one software-defined infrastructure is that we can upgrade everything from a single click rather than having to do weeks of planning and integration up front. And because they can move faster, their staff have more time to focus on strategic initiatives rather than just putting out fires all the time. And of course, all of this simplicity drove cost savings as well by driving a lot of the complexity out of their data centers. Now, Trek, if you're an outdoors person, you like mountain biking, you know Trek. Again, it's the same type of story we're hearing from these folks in a different industry. Massive reduction in infrastructure management, reduction in footprint in the data center by collapsing multiple different vendors into a single software-defined stack. They were able to spend less on the physical data center space and save money and energy as well. Great for meeting their investors' ESG goals as well, because they can point to this and saying, IT is now taking strategic efforts to lower our footprint. And what that translated to is that their IT team is able to respond to the business in hours instead of days or weeks, which means faster response time to customers, which means better sales outcomes. And they were able to do this while also embracing hybrid cloud. Again, another customer that started on-prem decided they wanted to start using public cloud services and were able to seamlessly extend their Nutanix system into the public clouds, giving them that flexibility. Not just there, we've got more, whether it's in finance with RDL, using database as a service. Again, allowing them to cut their provisioning time by 90%. So that translated to faster performance for their call center, actually 6x improvement in their call centers, and cost savings as well. Another one in Canada, TELUS, a very large telecommunications provider, built a public or private cloud on top of this, and that's resulted in their ability to get new products to market faster. Right? New services now are released in hours. Someone can code something up and get it out to their customers because infrastructure is now flexible. And they were able to increase their availability as well to meet their SLAs and lower their costs. And same thing in telecommunications here, whether it's in faster analytics for faster turnaround or lower OpEx. They were able to do all of this by moving to this software-defined hybrid platform. So just summing up here, Nutanix is a company, we've really focused a lot on making things simple. We think there's too much complexity in IT, and that the next generation of successful IT is going to be based on generalists, folks that can cross multiple disciplines. And the best way to be a generalist is to have a system that's easy to operate, that uses things like AI to help really bring self-healing, self-monitoring, and self-alerting infrastructure to keep people away from fighting fires and focusing on how they can drive value. And building in security from day one so that hardening a system is not the end user's responsibility, that the system comes secure out of the box and you can point to an auditable system to show that you're meeting security standards and baselines. Again, creating a single platform that can run every workload so you don't have to worry about different silos. And you can more efficiently use your physical data center space, your energy, and your hardware resources. And then bringing advanced data services, whether it's file storage, object storage, block storage, database, NoSQL database, bringing all of that as a service built into one platform so you can be intelligent about your data, because data is the lifeblood of any digital business. And then doing all of that while preserving flexibility and choice. Your choice of hypervisor, choice of hardware provider, choice of public cloud, choice of container runtime, and making your licenses portable across all of those. Again, the Nutanix hybrid platform, it's resilient, it's simple, it's portable, and you can move your applications without ever having to refactor or edit them. And you can see all of your clouds in one spot. And again, don't just take my word for it. If you look at some of the analysis done here, faster ROI, lower cost of operations, faster upgrades, less unplanned downtime. And then here's the big one, additional revenue, less staff time required to deploy and manage compute and storage resources. And that's really what it comes down to. Because again, when we think about that skills gap, it's how can we take these valuable IT people and focus them on adding value to the business. And what are the outcomes we get from this? Well, it means more efficiency, whether it's your developers, your help desk, your security teams, your infrastructure teams. It means we're getting actual better business and IT outcomes based on the platform we're adopting. So I'll finish with this. I gave a very high-level overview today, really focused on this hybrid cloud, but there's nothing better, I find, than trying something out. So if anything you heard today caught your interest, of course, please reach out. We're happy to schedule a briefing or a deep dive, but I encourage you and your teams to try something hands-on. We've got a great platform called Test Drive. It's at Nutanix.com. You can just go to the test drive link or this URL directly. And this allows you for free to get a hands-on real Nutanix environment. You can do what you want with it, or you can do a guided tour that walks you through different use cases, like hybrid cloud, like database as a service, like file and object storage, et cetera. So you can really see the difference between what we can do and what traditional IT has looked like for before. So with that, we'll open it up for any questions, and thank you very much for your time.